it's all practice, right? It's all part of a process of learning what we're doing, and no one's first draft is perfect. Hi, I'm Kayla Amanda. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for being here. I have finished revisions on my Dumb Shapeshifter book, and I want to talk a little bit about what that taught me about my writing process and what I need to know going forward into my next project. I know that's not like the most universally applicable experience. It is like my writing process and what I learned from it. But this is as much about talking to future me as it is about talking to you. So I think that it's beneficial for me to have going forward, and hopefully you can find something that resonates with you in it. So the first thing is that I'm trash at a first act. My first act is basically a zero draft of absolute garbage, even though I am also an intense plotter. I did not know that you could be both a zero drafter and a very intense plotter at the same time, but I need the plot to even get started on my project. Like, my plot outlines have color coding and what page things should happen on, and I spend weeks and weeks on them, and then I still zero draft my first act. But if I don't have my plot, I can't actually get the drafting done, because if I don't know what's coming next or what I intend to come next, I can't actually write the next scene. I get option paralysis because there's too many things that I could do, so I don't actually get it drafted to ever revise it. But even with that draft, I end up finding mistakes that I've made and plot holes that I've created for myself and like inconsistencies that I need to make really big structural changes for, and then redoing all of Act 1 anyway, which is kind of frustrating because I put so much effort into that plot. But at the same time, if I didn't do all of that plot work, I would never get anything written to revise. So I guess I am somehow both a plotter and a zero drafter, and I just have to learn to be okay with that. I'm at the very least in good company. My friend Rebecca says that she also often rewrites her first act, so at least I'm not alone in that. And on the topic of my very intense outlining, I need to come up with a system to track my changes as I'm writing. As I'm drafting, I come up with changes that I want to make, or characters that I want to add, or notes that I want to make sure are carried through. And I don't actually have a system currently for how I'm writing down those changes to let future Kayla know how they've been implemented. I will just make a note on my outline, and that's all well and good, but does that mean that I have gone back through the beginning of my draft and implemented it from the start? Does it mean that I have implemented it from this point? If I've implemented it partway through the story, I need to know when in the story that implementation starts, or if this is just something that I want but I haven't implemented yet. So I need a system to track that on my outlining sheet so that I'm really clear on where things start and what I need to pick up on between revisions. Because for me, there is a period between the end of drafting and the start of formal revising where I'm just sort of bringing together all of the things that I know I want to read for, the changes that I know I want to make, and I'm applying some of them without actually doing the full revision process. So having a system which lets me easily and clearly understand what needs to be changed, where it needs to be changed from, and how to implement those changes is going to save me a lot of stress as I do my revision process. I also need to get so much better at nailing down the dynamic between my romantic leads. I'm really good at coming up with a premise. I love a premise, a trope, but I'm not great at nailing down how that trope is actually going to function between my couple. I had this problem with Alex where I knew what the trope I wanted for him and Kara was, but I wasn't actually clear on why Kara wanted to be with him other than fulfilling the needs of that trope. Like, he didn't have any reason that she wanted to be with him because he was just hot and present, and that's not a good enough reason to fall for someone. That's a good enough reason to sleep with someone, but that wasn't the story I was telling for them. So going forward into my next project, I need to make sure that I know exactly why my characters want to be together, why they're both interested in each other, why they're drawn to each other in more than just a trope fulfilling way. It's one thing to know what their premise is and what their sort of general dynamic is, but I also need to be super clear on exactly how that's going to function in the story and how their personalities bring themselves together so that my next love interest is not just hot and present like Alex was. I did end up fixing that, but it took work, and it was frustrating to look back at my manuscript and realize that one of my main characters was just sort of a placeholder that was good looking but didn't have a lot of personality. So going back to change that was tedious, and if I can avoid that in future by getting much more clear in the beginning, I think that that will help me both with my plotting and with my actual writing and character description, and making my characters both feel more substantive and more real. On a more positive note, when I'm more consistent in my writing time, my writing quality becomes more consistent. I think part of it is that I just stay focused on that world and I stay focused on that story's voice, so it sounds more like it all fits together. But I also think that not taking big breaks helps me to not need to relearn my world. And I can kind of tell when I've hit a section where I took a longer break. With the beginning of Kara and Alex's story, I sort of wrote it in fits and starts. There was like a chunk of work and then a long break and then a chunk of work and then a long break. And I can tell when those long breaks are because it takes me a little while to get back into the rhythm of the story and sort of relearn my footing and just to get into the habit of writing again, right? Like writing is a muscle, so when I'm not working on it, it becomes sloppier. And when I'm working on it consistently, I don't need to take those warm-up minutes quite the same way. It just flows much more easily into each other. So that is another thing to keep track of. While I have noticed that if you watched my Q2, Q3 video, there is some like burnout with me when I'm pushing really hard and pushing really consistently, because I do have like a normal job and I do have other things on my plate. I also want to not take huge long breaks. So I think that if I'm more consistent with shorter, more frequent breaks, but like larger picture, being really consistent with my writing, that will keep the quality of my writing up and keep me focused in my world without risking the burnout that I've been finding at the end of my quarters when I have been pushing for 2 months and then I have a month where I'm sort of struggling to stay focused. But like really at the end of the day, I was not as bad as I thought I was. I mean, there are definitely parts where it needed a lot of work and it needed a lot of revising and I didn't enjoy it. But there was stuff that I was proud of. There was work that I think I did a really good job on, and I need to remember that going into my next project, and not just drafting my next project, but revising my next project, not to quite dread my own work so much. Like, I do this for a reason. I do it because I love it, and if I didn't think I was at least a little bit good, I don't think I would do it. So I just need to let myself have a bit more ego about it, honestly. I need to let myself think that I'm good, which can sometimes be hard. So yes, there were parts that really sucked, and there were parts that were good and that I'm proud of and that I liked. So I need to just, you know, be more gentle with myself about my actual skill and about how my first act is a zero draft. I think that is the thing that I have to take. Well, no. The two things that I have to take most concretely going forward are nailing down that dynamic between my couple. I like really don't want to be in a position where my love interest is just a hot placeholder, a sexy lamp, if you will. I want to make sure that going into my next project, my love interests are both dynamic and interesting and you know why they want to be together. So I want to nail that dynamic down. But also I need to be okay with the fact that Act 1 is a zero draft, or essentially a zero draft. I don't need to be perfect right out the gate, and it makes sense that I need some time in the world to see if what I thought was going to work actually is. So it makes sense that in Act 1, when I'm still sort of learning the dynamics of the characters and fleshing out the world building, it'll become clear if I need to make big structural changes, and that's just sort of fine. That's just a part of my process, and like I said, I'm not the only one who does it, so I guess it's allowed and I shouldn't be too hard on myself. It's like really hard not to be incredibly critical of my own process because we're all very critical of ourselves. We're our own worst critics, and we spend so much time seeing the stuff that doesn't work and the stuff that is like bad writing or dumb plotting or messy, and so it's like hard to get past that. Even now that I'm in the revision process and now that I'm looking for the things that I think I did well at, it's still hard to like let go of that stuff. Like, even knowing that it's just a first draft and it is always going to need a revision, I still feel weird that my first act is essentially a zero draft and that I will almost always rewrite my first act. Like, I did it with my necromancy book too. And I did it with my Magic Murder book too. I always rewrite my first act and somehow I feel weird about it. It's like I'm not allowed to make any mistakes in the version that is for making mistakes in, which is not helpful, future Kayla. It's not a kind thing to do to yourself, and it doesn't make you want to keep writing. So maybe just be okay with the fact that your first act is a zero draft. Maybe like I don't know, maybe when I do my next first draft, I will title it like Zero Draft Act 1 and then just like fully embrace the fact that it's a zero draft. Like really mark it up and let it just be as zero drafty as possible, and that might help me get out of my head about it a little bit. I don't know. My next project is coming up, I guess. So we'll see how I actually put it into practice, but I guess the real takeaway is not so much that I need a system for tracking changes or that I need to get clear on my romantic dynamics or that my first act is always going to be a zero draft. Like those are all useful pieces of information, but if I only remember one thing from this, and if you only take one thing from this, it's that I did not draft as bad a book as I thought I did. And I guarantee you, if you are feeling like your first draft is shit and should never see the light of day and no one will ever like it, and as soon as you finish it you're gonna throw it in a drawer and never look at it again, don't do that. Give yourself the grace to like actually look at it and actually read it and try to look at it through the eyes of someone who is not so self-critical, because I found things in my draft that I was really proud of, and I guarantee you, you will find things in your draft that you are really proud of. So whatever mistakes you find or whatever things you think you can improve, that's what the revision process is for. And now on the other side of my revisions, my book is like a lot better than I thought it was. And it didn't actually take that much more work to get it there. So if I can do it, you certainly can do it, because I am the Hot Mess Express. As we all know, I'm just like 3 cats in a goblet in a trench coat. Thank you so much for sticking with me through all of this and through revising this book so far. I only have a few stages left working with Kara and Alex, and then I can move on to another project, and I don't know how I feel about that. It's kind of scary, but thank you for being with me through all of this. If you were looking for me anywhere else, I am pretty much everywhere as Kayla Amanda. That is K-A-Y-L-U-G-H-M-A-N-D-A, and I'll see you next time. My email, please. What are you doing? Don't you do it. Oh, don't you eat that plant. Don't you dare. Hey, hey, no. Naughty. Please don't eat my plants.